Good afternoon, everyone. This is A Marvelous, and I'm back, as promised, with part two of Are You Racist? Who Has a Right to Comment on Black Culture and a Dominican Hypocrisy Against Haitians? And before we proceed, I just want to give a shout out to my future sponsor, OJC, Organic Juice Cleanse. This is an excellent product. I get my greens in every day, sometimes 2 to 3 times a day. So check them out. With that said, we're going to get right into it. I got a lot of feedback from the first video, and in doing this, I came across a gentleman on YouTube, and he has a video addressing this very issue, the deportation issue that happened last year. And the title is Dominicans Are Racist, but he's saying how they're not racist. Excellent video. I suggest everyone checks him out. His name is Manuel Pimentel. At That's Dominican is his moniker on Twitter and YouTube. Excellent video. He has his sources. He talks about how Dominicans are not racist and how they have helped support Haitians, and that people misunderstand the deportation situation. I thought it was a great video. However, I think there were some things that he left out, which I'm going to address, which is important because he did not touch on Dominican Republic's history and how that trickles down to things like the deportation of last year. So with that, I came across an article that I thought was very, very telling. And it's in Foreign Policy Magazine. That's Foreign Policy Magazine, October 8th, 2015, written by Michelle Walker. And I don't think that's a Dominican person or black, so it's neutral. So, with that, the name of the article is The Dominican Republic's Shameful Deportation Legacy. The Dominican Republic is desperately trying to win back the world's respect after its expulsion of Haitians. History, however, stands in its way. So this article uses the word very deliberately, legacy. So it's implying that and showing that Dominican Republic has a legacy, a history of racism, a history of denying Haitians, and it really has nothing to do with resources. It has nothing to do with being strained, economics, none of the things that Manuel Pimentel claims. I'm going to read the first paragraph of the article just to give some historical context because this is important. Anytime you see things happening in the present, in terms when you're talking about a race, a culture, world events, economics, politics, it's important to look at the history of the region that we're dealing with. This way, you can put things in a proper understanding because history follows all races, all cultures, all ethnicities, and you cannot just divorce from its history because the ideologies that we carry trickle down. Unless that person, ethnicity, culture, or region has had a revolution, it's a shadow that's cast amongst everyone based on the history and world events that happened in the past. So the article begins like this. Today's refugee crisis in Europe recalls another refugee crisis that occurred nearly 8 decades ago. In 1938, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt called officials from 32 nations to assemble in Evian-les-Bains, France, to devise a plan to help Europe's Jewish refugees. Not a single major country stepped up in a significant way, and most did nothing at all. The only leader to heed the call was General Leonidas Trujillo, the dictator of the Dominican Republic, who offered 100,000 visas and 26,000 acres. Now, let's stop right there, because in the video, this gentleman, Manuel Pimentel, implied that one of the reasons for the deportation of Haitians was that after the Haitian earthquake, the Dominican Republic, in terms of space, it could not accommodate all of the Haitians because they didn't have enough space. So my question is this: how much did Dominican Republic increase its space since 1938? Because to offer 100,000 visas and 26,000 acres, that shows that there's quite enough space. And what's the population increase from that time until now? Was it that much to the point to where 26,000 acres are used and they can't extend their arms? That's strange. Let's go to the Evian conference. And I'm going to cite all the sources in the description video when I post. On July 7th, 1938, as a result of American pressure, an international conference was held at Evian in France. It discussed what could be done to help the German Jews. Whilst each of the 32 delegates expressed their concern about the situation in Germany, the countries concerned offered very little practical help. During the conference, the British government made it very clear that it would not be able to increase its quota for refugees, citing high levels of unemployment. France also said that they were at the extreme point of saturation. The Australian delegate responded, quote, "As we have no real racial problem, we are not desirous of importing one," end quote. Other countries also cited the economic depression and population levels as a reason why they could not increase refugee quotas. This is important. Only the Dominican Republic volunteered to take up to 100,000 refugees, but then only in return for large amounts of money. Wait a minute, because we're addressing the space issue, right? The Dominican Republic, out of all the people out of all of the delegates in this conference, only the Dominican Republic government stepped up to take in these Jewish refugees. And we went over what they were willing to offer. 26,000 acres, 100,000 visas. And they volunteered. Wasn't asked, wasn't pressured. They volunteered. Wow. No earthquake, no major disaster. All of the nations had economic depression, just like the Dominican Republic. So I find that interesting. Let's suspend that. We're going to go to Wikipedia and get into the mindset of this general who volunteered to help the Jewish refugees. Trujillo was known for his open-door policy, accepting Jewish refugees from Europe, Japanese migration during the 1930s, and exiles from Spain during its civil war. So, Dominican government, through Trujillo, accepted Jewish refugees from Europe, Japanese migration during the 1930s, and exiles from Spain. That's Jews, Japanese, Spanish. The Dominican Republic government had an open-door policy and welcome into their limited spatial territory. He developed a uniquely Dominican policy of racial discrimination. They have a name for it. So the Dominican Republic has a uniquely, and I'm going to document that too in this video, because the Dominican Republic government has also been looked into in terms of human rights violations, just for this issue. Human rights violations. So this isn't about economics. This is racism. They have a uniquely Dominican policy of racial discrimination against Haitians, and the name is anti-Haitianismo, meaning anti-Haitianism, targeting the mostly black inhabitants of his neighboring country and those within the Platano Curtain, including many Afro-Dominican citizens. And it goes on to talk about the Evian conference. So this has nothing to do with space, has nothing to do with earthquakes, and has nothing to do with, how can I say, economics. Nothing at all. This is pure racism. Let's go back further and look into this General Rafael Trujillo, because this is important to see, because when you talk about this and when you talk to people in general, again, that aren't black or are black but identify with something outside of black, certain issues people don't want to speak out on, and this is important. And I'm doing this out of love, because I have friends and contacts of different ethnicities, and when it comes to different subjects, when it hits home to their cultural identification and the wrongness or the injustices that they do, it's danced around. Hence videos like Mr. Pimentel's, and it has to be addressed. And it has nothing to do with Haitians instigating. This is pure racism because it's based on the color of skin. And I'm going to show this. I'm going to read another article. Despite being born to parents of mixed racial heritage, Trujillo denied he had the darker skin indicative of his Haitian ancestry. So this is self-hate. He used white powder on his face to lighten it and instituted anti-Haitianismo, racial bias against Haitians, as part of the Dominican policy. School children were taught that native Dominicans were white and of Spanish descent, whereas Haitians were black and African descent, slave descent. This racial prejudice coincided with the ideas of racial purity promulgated by Adolf Hitler, who was rising to power in Germany around the same time. So, around the same time that this general in the Dominican Republic was in power was around the same time that Hitler and the Nazis were rising to power. That explains the global climate of the economics of racism and things like that. So this is a global issue, period. Global issue, where very few people were immune. And this global issue affected black people, period. And Dominican government participated in that. This gentleman used white powder on his face to lighten his skin. What is that? So if this type of person is in power implementing policies, that's racism. That's hate. That's dislike. Fierce prejudice. You pick the title. So this has nothing to do with economics. So let's stop that. This is a history of a country that's racist amongst many. And until we address that, we're never going to have true dialogues of peace. And this is important. And the reason why I care is because in this world, there's so many things going on that affect people's lives positively and negatively. And if we're going to interact on a peaceful level, we have to do our best to see things as they are, even if it hurts. Because if not, it's going to lead to a lot of deception, a lot of backstabbing, and we're not going to go anywhere. And it's going to affect our children because these problems aren't going to be solved and they're going to be carrying the torch. And that's an issue. But let's continue. Claiming Haitians living on the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic were stealing cattle and food from the Dominicans and wishing to cleanse the country of the darker race, Trujillo ordered his men to kill all Haitians found along the border. So his reason was that the Haitians were stealing, similar to the rationale of people like my friend who started this and Manuel Pimentel saying that either Haitians were killing or that Haitians were burdening the Dominican government by staying there and pretty much not contributing. These are the rationales for things like deportation and massacres that has happened to the Haitian people for 8 decades. However, we see that this is false. Trujillo ordered his men to kill all Haitians found along the border. Check this out. To identify the Haitians, Trujillo ordered each person to say the Spanish word for parsley, perejil. Maybe I'm Haitian because maybe I didn't pronounce it right. Hopefully I don't get killed. If the person could properly roll the R in the word, they were assumed to be of Spanish and Dominican descent and were spared. If they could not roll it, they were identified as Haitian and were killed. Let me read that again. Claiming Haitians living on the border between Haiti and the Dominican Republic were stealing cattle and food from the Dominicans and wishing to cleanse the country of the darker race, Trujillo ordered his men to kill all Haitians found along the border. To identify the Haitians, this is racial profiling, period, end of story. To identify the Haitians, Trujillo ordered each person to say the Spanish word for parsley, perejil. If the person could properly roll the R in the word, they were assumed to be of Spanish and Dominican descent, non-black, non-Haitian, and were spared. They weren't killed, they were good. If they could not roll it, they were identified as Haitian, black, dark-skinned, and were killed. For 5 days, from October 2nd to October 8th, 1937, Trujillo's troops, local political members, and even civilians murdered all Haitians they could find. All Haitians they can find. Nothing to do with space, nothing to do with politics, nothing to do with economics. Purely off race. Using guns, machetes, clubs, and knives. An estimated 20 to 30,000 Haitians were killed in what became known as the Parsley Massacre. They have a massacre that was attributed to the Dominican Republicans Pure hatred, pure racism towards Haiti and Haitians. This is 8 decades before last year's deportation. This is Dominican Republic's history. This is the shadow that follows Dominicans and the Dominican Republic. So I make this video to show that we have to call a spade, period. No matter what, racism is done. If you attribute it to it, if you contribute to it, then you are guilty. And if you defend it and try to make excuses for it, then you're also guilty. And don't put it under the guise of class or economics. This is racism. Facts, not opinion. Another name given to this large-scale extermination is El Corte, the cutting, for the large number of machetes and knives used. To aid his troops in trapping Haitians, Trujillo ordered the main bridge between Haiti and the Dominican Republic closed. He closed the borders. The river below was shallow, and many Haitians attempted to flee to their native land by crossing the river, but were caught and killed. The river became known as Massacre River. So they have historical names for the killing of Haitians just because they're black. But yeah, we want to celebrate our independence from Haiti, who was the individuals in the country that freed the whole island. So please don't tell me about accruing burdens from Haitians after the earthquake. In fact, you owe. So I have to lay that context down because in terms of last year's deportation, this is something that has followed Dominican Republic, and it's going to continue to follow. And Dominicans and the government, not all Dominicans, I'm not saying all, but the shadow follows. So when I see videos like that of Manuel Pimentel or talk to my friend, those are hints of racism. Now, some people might not notice, and that's okay. There is a such thing as sincere racism. But when things like this are pointed out, we have to stop making excuses for it. We have to stop saying, oh, it's politics. Oh, you don't know, you haven't been there. Bullshit. I don't have to go there. These things happen. And it have not been atoned. In fact, I was reading something and it was saying that the Catholic Church actually requested the Dominican government to apologize and say, I'm sorry for things like this. And the Dominican government refused. They said that this wasn't current. This was something that happened in the past. Why should we apologize? So that's indicative of certain Dominicans' mindset in terms of thinking that this is something that happened. But when you defend things like deporting the Haitians of Dominican origin, then you're contributing to your ancestors of the past, and this is something you need to atone for and understand that this isn't right. Let me give another example. There was a human activist in DR. She was well known. Her name is Sonja Pierre. Sonja Pierre. And she spoke out on this very thing. She died a few years back, and she was a human rights activist. She was of Dominican descent. I'm going to read a little bit about her bio. Sonja Pierre, a human rights activist who had fought discrimination against Dominicans of Haitian descent since she was a child. She died on December 4th, around 2006. For decades, her activism had made her the target of threats in the Dominican Republic, which shares the island of Hispaniola with Haiti, but it earned her recognition from overseas as a defender of human rights, including an award for Amnesty International. Pierre has fought to secure citizenship and education for the beleaguered minority of Dominican-born ethnic Haitians, of whom between 500,000 and 1 million live in the Dominican Republic, many in isolated village slums. Most of those born in the Republic are descendants of Haitians who crossed the border, fleeing violence or seeking economic opportunity. So she was a rights activist, and she had lots of trouble in speaking out against this very thing. So my question is, if it's not about racism, why would you give trouble to individuals like this that's speaking out for something that's her inherent right as a Dominican-born woman? So I lay all this down to say that this isn't a matter of being burdened. And the first article in Foreign Policy goes on to say that it was so bad that there was human rights studies and advocacies that have condemned the Dominican Republic for their treatment of Haitians historically and recently. If you look up human rights, Dominican Republic government, you will see this. So there are human rights violations. So human rights violations aren't brought up because you're economically burdened. They're brought up based on harsh policies towards another people different than the natives of that land. And in that same article, it mentioned that the press from the Dominican Republic government was so bad in terms of their practices that they hired a public relations firm. Now, here's my thing. What's the purpose of hiring a public relations firm unless you want to clean up your image? And if you have nothing to hide, and if you're just a matter of helping people, why would you hire a public relations firm? The Harbor Group to represent the government of the Dominican Republic. This is a public relations firm located in D.C. It has extensive experience with working with embassies in other countries, as well as helping clients make government connections and providing tourism public relations as needed. The group was formed in 2001. So the Dominican Republic government hired this public relations firm in order to clean up their image. The Harbor Group is an independent PR firm that helps their clients inform, convince, persuade others. But they also write, measure, organize, and pitch on their clients' behalf. They report that most of their clients remain with them for a long time, so they must be doing things right. Their work for the government of the Dominican Republic will probably focus on developing campaigns to influence public outcomes. So the Dominican Republic hired the Harbor Group, a public relations firm, to clean up their dirty image of their treatment of Haitians and to make themselves look innocent, which they're not. So, I mean, there's tons of sources, but the reason why I wanted to make this is to show, mostly, and per the conversation of one of my close friends who's Dominican, and also to this gentleman Manuel Pimentel that's Dominican, that this isn't about economics. This isn't about the Dominican Republic being strained from housing so many Haitians after the earthquake. It is a history of racism that the Dominican Republic celebrates their independence with, not from the colonizers of Europe, but from the dark Haitians. They have a whole massacre and river named after the slaughter of Haitians, purely based off race, nothing else, not an economic burden. So we have to admit this. And the longer we try to hide it and pretend that it doesn't exist, shows that you can be non-white and still have racist tendencies, even if you have a sincere heart. And this has to be addressed, because if not, it's going to always leave people open to commenting on black culture and critiquing it, but without cleaning their own house and critiquing their own home and critiquing the negatives that they do. So if you're Dominican, Chinese, European, Caucasian, Asian, Italian, whatever you subscribe to, I suggest before you comment on black culture, unless it's a burden to you, clean up your own house. Comment on your own ethnicity and speak out against things that's incorrect. Because until we are self-accountable within ourselves and our own communities and ethnicities, we don't have the right to comment on others. And that's just going to cause more friction. And this is why you see the friction in politics now with the candidates, is because everyone is throwing stones at each other because they're looking for some representative to grasp onto their warped sense of race and hidden prejudice. And they're looking towards these people like Donald Trump, Hillary Clinton, and Bernie Sanders to play out these false race cards in order to validate their existence. And that's horrible. You validate your own existence, and you validate your culture's existence. And by cleaning up your own house and critiquing your own instead of others first, then we can all get along and things can improve. So with that, thank you for tuning in. Anything I got incorrect, I apologize in advance. Feel free to comment. Question, positive and negative, is welcome. I will put the sources in the link. And that's that. I appreciate you. Peace.